One here today. Now, what connection does the Ohio Turnpike have to the Underground Railroad? Well, the Underground Railroad, as you can see on this map to my left, in Ohio consisted of south to north escape routes that followed two major paths, mainly from West Virginia and Kentucky, across the Ohio River and to points north. Some of these major trails converged in eastern Ohio while others converged in western Ohio, and today a lot of these paths cross what we know as the Ohio Turnpike. These markers are a great educational opportunity for turnpike travelers near and far. And here at this service plaza alone, an estimated 3 million visitors will have an opportunity to learn about the Underground Railroad when they walk past the markers. I'm sure that they will pause to read and reflect on the meanings of the stories that are displayed on these markers. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honoring the memories of those who risked life and liberty for the most basic of human values, pursuit of liberty, during an extremely divided and dangerous time in the history of our nation. And to celebrate with us, we have some very important guests today. The Honorable Mike DeWine, our governor. Next to him, Mrs. Sandra Barber, who's on the Ohio Turnpike Commission. Dr. Jack Marchbanks with the Ohio Department of Transportation. Founder and President Emeritus of the Friends of Freedom Society, Ms. Kathy Nelson, and the President of the Ohio History Connection, Mr. Bert Logan. Thank you all for being with us today. I would also like to acknowledge some visitors, local dignitaries who have taken time to come and join us today. I'd like to invite Commission Member Mrs. Sandra Barber to come and introduce our governor.
Good afternoon. It is my honor and pleasure now to introduce a very learned student of Ohio history. He is a man who cares passionately about our state's future, and with good reason. He himself is a devoted husband, father to 8 children, and grandfather to 24 grandchildren. Our governor himself will go down in history for his distinguished career in public service, working to protect Ohio children and families. He was previously the 50th Attorney General of Ohio and has also been elected to serve as Greene County Prosecutor, Ohio State Senator, U.S. Congressman, Ohio Lieutenant Governor, and a United States Senator. Please join me in welcoming the 70th Governor of the great state of Ohio, Mike DeWine.
Thank you very much. Sandy, thank you very much. It's great to be with everyone today, and get rid of this. Well, this is a very happy occasion. I want to thank Sandy for the introduction. Farzan, thank you for the work that you do. Jack Marchbanks, the Director of the Ohio Department of Transportation. And I know we got some other ODOT folks here, and we appreciate what they do every day, as well as people who work at the Turnpike. You know, I stop in these plazas quite often, as much as I travel around the state, and they always look great. And it's always a kind of a nice opportunity to come in here, get something to eat, and just maybe take a few minutes to kind of walk around. I want to particularly call out Kathy Nelson, who's the founder of the Friends of Freedom Society. Thank you, Kathy, for doing this. Bert Logan, CEO of the Ohio History Connection. Bert, thank you for what the History Connection does every single day to preserve our history in the state of Ohio and to enable us to talk and tell this story to our young people. You know, as I look at this plaque that's going to be outside, this marker that's going to be outside, what I think about is the thousands of people who are going to come through here. And just imagine, you know, in the summer, when people are going to linger a little longer to look and see what's out there. But someone coming in here, maybe from Pennsylvania, someone coming from out west, who's coming across the country, and who might not know much about the Underground Railroad. And this is a very, very succinct, quick explanation of the Underground Railroad. But it's, again, it provides an opportunity, kind of a teaching moment for parents who have kids here who are traveling to stop and just look at the marker. I know Fran and I, as we travel across the country with kids or grandkids, now with our grandkids, you know, we look for historic markers. And if there's one at a rest area, we usually stop and take a look at that. And so this is a real teaching opportunity. I think it's significant that we have people from the library here today. We have people from several historical societies. They're involved in teaching that history as well. If my wife Fran was here, she would remind me that when we got married between our second and third year, both students at Miami University, and she thought she was marrying a history teacher because I was an education major and I was getting ready to student teach, and that's what I thought I was going to do. So I still have a love for history. I don't pretend to be an historian. I have great respect for historians, but I really have a love of history. And so this is why I really wanted to be here today. I think it's important for the governor to be here during Black History Month and really to help unveil these plaques that's really going to continue to tell the story of the Underground Railroad. And what an amazing story it is. It's a story of sadness because of problems in regard to slavery, the great tragedy of slavery. But it's also a great story about triumph and about courage. Courage, first of all, by the slaves. I mean, imagine escaping, leaving, having the guts to do that, going to a future that you don't know what that future is going to be. In some cases, leaving family members and going off and not knowing whether you're going to be caught, not knowing whether you're going to be returned, not knowing either if you make it, what your new life is going to be. So that just took a lot of guts and it took a lot of courage, and we celebrate that today. It also took some courage for the people who helped them, people who hid them and went out of their way to do this and did it for strangers. But both the escaping slaves as well as the folks who helped them were dedicated to freedom. And if you look at some of the essential things that we value in our country, freedom is certainly one of those essential things. And so I'm just delighted to be able to, as the governor, to be here representing all the 11.5 million people of the state of Ohio as we have this unveiling and celebrate some of our history. This is a history that is uniquely Ohio in the sense that a large number of the escaping slaves came through Ohio. As you've heard, came up from Virginia or came up from Kentucky, crossed the river, came into Ohio, and then had to traverse Ohio, come across the state of Ohio, and then get to Canada. So it's really a history and a day to celebrate people who had the guts and the courage to do that. So thank you all very much for being here, and we look forward to taking a look at the plaque in just a few moments. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Governor. The way you talked about the courage it took really brings the entire history of the railroad, Underground Railroad, into perspective. Our next speaker is a dear friend as well as a great partner in our transportation efforts statewide, the ODOT Director Jack Marchbanks. And Dr. Marchbanks, in an earlier life, was also one of the people who worked on creating the River to Lakes Freedom Trail. So, Dr. Marchbanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. It is indeed a privilege and pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to work for a governor like Mike DeWine, who understands the importance of our history and who took time out of his busy schedule to be here today to celebrate Black History Month with us in person. So that is fantastic. Thank you, Governor. Someone asked me, well, isn't history kind of like the past? The history is not the past. We make history every day. The point is, are we making good or bad history? The history we're celebrating today is heroic, and we should never forget it because we need to teach it to our children. Let them know this fantastic history that we have here in the state of Ohio, our legacy. As the governor mentioned, the people who traverse these trails from the river heading to the lake into Canada exhibited extreme courage, courage that really is phenomenal when you think about leaving and going on foot hundreds of miles traversing to freedom, not knowing what they would meet once they got to Canada or even if they would have any place to stay. But they believed in freedom and they took that walk north. One thing that's exciting about Ohio is that in 1787, as Mr. Logan will point out, our state, our future state, made sure that it would be a free state. Any African American born in Ohio was born free. And that is something that's remarkable. History shows that Presbyterians and Quakers throughout the state of Ohio were leaders. People of faith were leaders in the Underground Railroad system. And their acts were acts of bravery, but there were also acts of civil disobedience because they were in defiance of the black laws that we enacted here in Ohio and the fugitive slave laws. So that was a very important point. Another important point that's not really noted a lot is that there were a lot of free blacks in Ohio who assisted the Quakers, who assisted the Presbyterians and the people of faith, who participated in what was, in fact, the first civil rights movement in Ohio, in the country, the first organized social activism in the United States in defense of humanity, in defense of people who were not chattel, who were not property. They were human beings, and the people of Ohio recognized that, and Ohio was the epicenter of the abolitionist movement. The governor referred to many, many people coming through Ohio to make their way to freedom. Point of fact, the 1860 census was very accurate because slaveholders wanted to know how many, they wanted to get full credit for all the slaves they had, 3/5, but they were all counted toward representation in Congress. So the count of slaves in America in 1860 was 3,953,000, almost 4 million. But only 100,000 of them made it to freedom. But the point of fact here is 40,000 of that 100,000 came through Ohio, which will let you know how important Ohio was. In 2000, when I was working at the Ohio Department of Transportation in District 6 down in Central Ohio, I happened to be on watch when U.S. Secretary of Transportation Rodney Slater designated a Millennial Trails Award to the state's network of escape routes for runaway slaves. Now that was a nice designation. I think, Kathy Nelson pointed out to me, and I said, Kathy, that's great to have that designation, but don't we need to make it real? Let's do something that makes people know, or lets people know what an important role Ohio played. So we embarked on doing the research, working with local historians, lay historians, professional historians with Ohio Center, and we did the research on 10 key locations from Portsmouth all the way to Sandusky, which constitutes the River to Lake Underground Railroad Freedom Trail. That trail exists today. Those markers are there for your viewing. If you choose to do it as a trip, as a historical trip, it's something you can do. And we actually have maps that I provided to Mr. Ahmed. Working with the Ohio History Center, we made this happen. It took 4 years, but with our hard work, we have a River to Lake Freedom Trail commemorating Ohio's dedication to human rights. We are so happy that the Ohio Turnpike and Infrastructure Commission chose to join and amplify our proud history here in Ohio. Again, you make history every day. What kind of history are we making today? I think it's a proud history because we're recognizing our role in human rights and freedom around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Jack, and your reference to history being made today reminds me of an artist from Central Ohio that I think we both knew, the late Kojo Kamau. And Kojo once said to me during a conversation, remember, everything you do today is tomorrow's history. It was also my pleasure to get to know Ms. Kathy Nelson when I was in ODOT in District 6. She wanted to make sure that I understand that these markers that you talked about were up there and that I worked with her to preserve them if they get knocked over. So she wanted to make sure that happened. And she has been an integral part of our effort to join in commemorating a day like today, as well as putting up these markers to further amplify the significance of Ohio and the Underground Railroad and Northern Ohio and the Underground Railroad. So, Kathy, would you please come up and share your thoughts with us?
Now, I am not really the dragon lady. Well, yes, I am. Good afternoon. It's an honor and a privilege to be here at this special occasion. And I am joined by longtime Friends of Freedom Society member and co-writer of the text of this marker, Ms. Leslie Blankenship. Raise your hand, Leslie. We are both thrilled to witness two of our organization's Underground Railroad markers be unveiled at the Ohio Turnpike Service plazas here in Portage County. I want to sincerely thank Executive Director Farzan Ahmed and Public Information Officer Brian Newbacher. Brian, where are you? Somewhere. Oh, he's around, I know. For giving us the opportunity to share the rich history of Ohio's role in the Underground Railroad in this public place. Ohio being flanked by two Quaker states, Indiana and Pennsylvania, west and east, and two slave states, Indiana, or two slave states to the south, Kentucky and Virginia. This was the gateway to freedom in the north, reaching Canada. This area of eastern Ohio was known as the Western Reserve and home to many abolitionists, such as Brimfield's Andrew Kelso, Hudson's Laura Case, and Alliance's J. Ridgway Haynes, whose story is mentioned on this marker. These men and their wives actively assisted those seeking freedom by willingly violating the fugitive slave laws and following what they believed was a higher moral law denied by the government but allowed by God. It has been said that you can't understand the future if you don't understand the past. America's past has been filled with wonderful moments. And it has also been filled with many tragic ones as well. Slavery was one of them. The Underground Railroad movement was one of our better moments in history, a time when people of diverse races, religions, politics, and economic status worked together for the common good of an oppressed race of people stolen and sold from their homeland. So Ohio's threads weave throughout the fabric of this nation. These markers will help tell the stories of the struggle, the perseverance, and the triumph to the visitors that will stop here for a respite from their travels. I hope they leave inspired by our story. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments, Kathy, and thank you for all the work that you did with us to get these markers here at the Ohio Turnpike. Our next guest represents the Ohio History Connection. That is the agency that works throughout Ohio to preserve our history, which is so very important for all of us as we look into the future. It's my honor to introduce the CEO of the Ohio History Connection, Mr. Bert Logan.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the real honor and opportunity to be here. I'd like for just a moment to think back to 1797 and to try to understand what the vision of our founding nation's founders was for Ohio. In 1787, the Continental Congress, meeting in New York City, which was our nation's governing body at that time, enacted the Northwest Ordinance, and it explicitly forbade slavery in the Northwest Territory and all the land northwest of the Ohio River. And that was very important because at the same time, 100 miles away in Philadelphia, another group of our founders who were working on what would become the United States Constitution, they were trying to make a more perfect union, but they could not agree on human bondage. And as a result, they made some minor compromises, but they really left the larger question unresolved. And it allowed slavery to fester in the new nation with catastrophic consequences. Now, the fact that Ohio was free doesn't mean that everything was perfect here. There had been serious attempts to overturn the Northwest Ordinance when the Ohio Constitution was being written. That failed. And then, unable to make that happen, a majority in the legislature imposed the so-called Black Laws that instituted an inequitable legal system in the Buckeye State. So as the question of slavery's future became more of a focus, the Ohio public divided. There emerged some who proclaimed the inherent unfairness and cruelty of slavery in the South. But this anti-slavery movement was more than matched in intensity and even in numbers by an anti-slavery faction. And as these two factions collided, there were riots across the North and here in Ohio too. By 1850, the situation was so tense that the Union was threatened. And the Compromise of 1850, enacted by Congress, like most compromises, really pleased very few. The South demanded, and got a stepped up, more aggressive Fugitive Slave Act that sought to crack down on runaways fleeing and those who assisted them. And this is the context that we mark and honor today. It's a story of those who sought freedom, it's a story of bravery, and it's also a story of law-breaking for a morally higher who helped the runaways in both big and small ways because they knew the difference between right and wrong. So on behalf of the Ohio History Connection, I want to say thank you to all those who made these markers possible, those who tell these stories, especially Kathy Nelson and her Friends of Freedom Associates, the Ohio Turnpike and Infrastructure Commission, and Governor DeWine, who by being here today underscores the historical and moral weight that was Ohio's leadership in the nation's Underground Railroad. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Logan. And as Mr. Logan said, he called it a celebration. Commemorating something like this is indeed a celebration. Putting together a couple of events takes a lot of work, and I would like to acknowledge the people who, along with many others, did most of the heavy lifting. The team was led by Adam Greenslade with the Ohio Turnpike. He was assisted by Chad Armstrong, Megan Governor, now the moment that we have all been waiting for. We'd like for you to do the honors and unveil this monument. And speakers, please join the governor.